I started GreenMax 31 years ago in the spare bedroom of my brownstone. 2 days after the deal was signed, Daewoo Japan collapsed. And so we spent the next 2 years in court trying to sort out and salvage something from that deal. And finally, we got a kill fee, but nothing else. And that was a real lesson to me that, even when the ink is dry, it doesn't mean the deal is happening. And the deal was all signed. I was ready to retire at a young age. And unfortunately, Toshiba had as their investment partner Tokyo Electric. And the day after the deal was signed, Fukushima happened. The drilling risk, which is, huge risk. The risk is kind of hydrocarbon risk on steroids. Yeah. Okay, so solar was always part of GreenMax's DNA. It's in the name, and I've been involved in my early career in renewables. I was one of those hippies with a ponytail. PAYGO as a financing vehicle was, let's say, a decision of last resort, an end to a means because of the failure of the capital markets. Saw just in the last few days that Trump's going to release his next wave of plans, including, defunding the United Nations. Or pulling the U.S. funding the United Nations by 2050, 50% of the working population
will be in Africa. Yeah.
So Mission 300 is a great thing on the one hand. I mean, it's very important that the World Bank and AFDB now have as a centerpiece of their policy and they're in the very core of their raison d'etre.
Cliff Aron is the founder and CEO of GreenMax Capital Group, a specialized fund management and advisory firm focused exclusively on the emerging markets in the nexus of energy access and productive use. And GreenMax has operated for more than 30 years and supported over 200 advisory, fund management, and asset management assignments in over 80 countries. In this conversation, Cliff will share his experience as a founder over the last 30 years with GreenMax, his insights and learnings from the evolution of the clean energy and climate sector, as well as opportunities, trends, and ideas around fund management solutions hosted by GreenMax and other partners out there towards accelerating energy access in Africa. Hi there, welcome to the Startup Evangelist Ideas for Africa. I'm honored today to be joined in this conversation with Cliff Aron, CEO and President of GreenMax Capital Group. Cliff, welcome to the discussion.
Great to be here, Daniel. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah. So GreenMax last year celebrated 30 years in history and remarkable feats. Maybe if you were to summarize what the 30 years has been for you as a founder, as an individual, as a professional, and just what it means for you as a company, given that you had different distinct phases of the business. Maybe you could just start us off on that.
Great. Well, yeah, indeed, 30 years is nothing to poo-poo about. It's an incredible achievement for us. I never started GreenMax with the anticipation that it would become essentially my life's work, but it has. I started GreenMax 31 years ago in the spare bedroom of my brownstone house in Park Slope, Brooklyn. and it was me and an assistant. And then we had the crazy idea to move to Eastern Europe and try to participate in the economic transitions that were happening in the early 90s, and found ourselves in a unique position because we were Americans in a very American-centric transition that we could play in this transition as a company, and we started the process of acquiring uh, two old coal-fired combined heat and power plants that had been serving industrial plants. Um, Everything at the time was overbuilt for capacity, so we quickly saw that there was, number one, opportunity to deliver excess heat and power to the community through district heating, and second, to convert coal to gas and coal to biomass. So we did that for a few years, and we actually teed up what was for us, and I think for the region, a monumental deal where we acquired the combined heat and power plant for the Daewoo Motors car factory in Lublin, Poland. And it was a done deal. And a few days after the deal was signed, Daewoo Japan collapsed. And so we spent the next 2 years in court trying to sort out and salvage something from that deal. And finally, we got a kill fee, but nothing else. And that was a real lesson to me that, even when the ink is dry, it doesn't mean the deal is happening. Um, and then we continued to do the project development, but we decided to go 100% green and started developing landfill gas cogeneration projects. So, we would cap the landfills, extract the methane gas, fire up a small gas-fired cogeneration unit that would provide electricity into the grid, and then heat to a local off-taker. So when we selected sites, it was critical that we either find or saw the potential to develop, like a greenhouse tomato growing facility right next to the garbage dump. It's not always easy to find an existing facility next to the garbage dump, because who wants to locate there, right? Uh, and we sold 4 plants that we had built, all under 2 megawatts. This was around 2003, 2004, and finally decided that I was exhausted from doing project development and being in Eastern Europe for a decade already, knew a thing or two, and the renewable energy obligation from the EU had to be adopted by the new member states in Eastern and Central Europe. So we noticed that all the major European energy companies that had been transitioning into renewables, like Electricity de Portugal and Iberdrola from Spain and EDF, and what was the precursor for Engie at the time, Suez Group, were trying to come to Eastern Europe and develop wind and solar projects, but they were scared of the market. They didn't speak the local languages. The business culture is quite different than in Western Europe. So we were there as representatives, and we were able to broker several landmark deals for the sale of ready to build or early stage development pipelines of wind and solar projects in Poland and Lithuania. And the market was crazy back then. The major energy companies were willing to pay 600 or 700 euro per megawatt for a ready to be built asset. Today, if you got 100, you'd be lucky. And so we did a few of those deals, and then another story of how your life can change on a dime. In this case, your economic life can change on a dime. We had landed our biggest client ever in Toshiba, and we had brokered two big deals for them, more than 1,000 megawatts, a gigawatt each, in Italy and Bulgaria, of solar projects. And the deal was all signed. I was ready to retire at a young age. And unfortunately, Toshiba had as their investment partner Tokyo Electric. And the day after the deal was signed, Fukushima happened. And so Tokyo Electric had to pull out of the deal. So, again, you can't count your chickens before they hatch.
Yeah. And how is it that at that point, because I'm assuming now for the three phases, the US and the Eastern Europe phase, you're more into project development. And then in this sort of Africa phase of the business, you shifted more towards transaction advisory, consulting, and data and fund management. Do you feel like those experiences spoke to your appetite for taking project development risks, particularly now coming into Africa?
Yeah, well, I mean, what I didn't mention is that as an entrepreneur, I never wanted to raise external capital for the company. So the only way to survive was to have, while we're doing project development, to have a source of revenue that would keep the doors open. So we always had a consulting and advisory business. Yeah, in the early days, we were working exclusively for the World Bank, EBRD, and IFC throughout Eastern Europe. But we had a small team, and it kept the doors open, and it funded the development of those projects. So, we took that ethos to Africa. We made a decision in 2009, 2005, 2006, that we wanted to migrate to the global south in order to have more impact. By that point in time, having been 12, 13 years in Eastern Europe, we had seen remarkable change and had had the privilege of making some small contributions to those changes. And, we were kind of hungry. Let's see where else we can contribute. And, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, South Pacific, really spoke to our team that we had learned something from our experience, and we could make a real contribution. But, quite honestly, we didn't really understand these markets at all. And it was a shock to me when doing initial research to discover that, there were at the time almost 1 billion people in the global south without modern energy services, and, one $1.5 billion at the time without modern cooking services, let alone, plumbing and sanitation. And, to be a part of bringing that infrastructure to the underserved populations of the world was really an exciting new mission for us. But we knew from our experiences in Eastern Europe that it ain't easy to go to new overseas markets. Um, so we had built a relationship in Eastern Europe with the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, an independent agency of the U.S. government, which I think from a few weeks from now will no longer be an independent agency, will become part of U.S. Development Finance Corporation. But they utilize consultants to research opportunities for giving project preparation grants for infrastructure projects. And as energy experts, we were able to be supported by US TDA to go to East Africa and find worthy energy projects that could be supported by the agency. So it was a way of coming into a new market under the umbrella of the US government with the embassy and U.S. commercial service in each of the countries, introducing us at ministerial level and parastatal company CEO level to explore opportunities, and that kind of
Is that when you started now the geothermal explorations in Kenya?
Yes, exactly. Because, one of our early missions in Kenya, we stopped in to see what was this newly formed company, parastatal company, a GDC, Geothermal Development Company, and heard about the, incredible resource. Steam is Kenya's oil, right? Already today, 50% of electricity is generated from Kenya's geothermal resources. So the government had uh, always pursued geothermal development through KenGen, the state-owned, at the time, state-owned energy generation company. And KenGen had done a remarkable job. But as KenGen became privatized, with still the government as a substantial shareholder, of course, the decision was taken to offload the drilling risk, which is, huge risk. It's the risk is kind of hydrocarbon risk on steroids, because with hydrocarbons, you drill. If you have 10 misses and you have one hit, that one hit is paying for the 10 misses, no problem, because hydrocarbons, you can sell them on the commodity market, right? They can be transported.
At that time, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, the drilling technology for geothermal wasn't as precision radio precise as maybe currently. I don't know if those risks have significantly gone down as since when you have
Not really. I mean, uh, the science of um, uh, above ground studies has become more sophisticated, for sure. So you have a much greater opportunity of success, but still, stuff happens and you never know until you've gone, 1,000 meters plus down, if you really have a win. And um, Yeah, there are new drilling techniques, directional drilling, which further reduces risk. But we've seen in Kenya, GDC, drilled I think 70 wells to get 35 hits, right? And yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then at what point did solar the solar shift happen for you? Uh, is it when you're discussing these projects with your family? At what point do you now sort of move into the off-grid solar market?
Yeah. Okay. So solar was always part of GreenMax's DNA. It's in the name, and I've been involved in my early career in renewables. I was one of those hippies with a ponytail working on renewables before it was fashionable. But in East Africa, you know, it was obvious what the potential for solar was, and it was also obvious that with some notable exceptions, the grid just wasn't going to the places where rural populations lived, and the chances of that happening in our lifetimes were pretty small. So back in around 2008, 2009, we got involved in what was the first large um, rollout on a large, I mean, on a community-wide basis of solar home systems. These were still fairly primitive and, not digitized solutions, not IoT enabled in any way for monitoring and control. But a company called Solar Energy Uganda, it was actually an NGO, um, approached us. We got them a US TDA grant, and then we got them initial capitalization through US Africa Development Fund. And this was remarkable. Like, 2,000 families got light. I got to visit the community. The kids in the community put on a play to demonstrate how light had changed their lives, and that was it. I was sold as, this, if we could do this, how incredible would that be?
Yeah, interesting. And then maybe on from that journey, what other significant changes did you observe in the market, potentially around off-grid? Uh, Maybe not only in Kenya, but even other markets you started to explore.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was, I guess, 2012, 2013, 2014 that you started to really hear about PAYGO Solar, and the technology innovations had occurred to enable digital platforms that would allow for digital payment schemes, mobile payment schemes, that suddenly made this whole pay-as-you-go dream a reality, and seemed extremely well suited for the African rural community market. Of course, the the impetus for developing this industry was impact, um, which is great. Um, but the early entrepreneurs, I think, saw and sold the opportunity as offering VC type returns. And, I think everybody learned over time that, delivering infrastructure, no matter how low cost, to the poorest people on the planet, has all kinds of risks associated with it, and logistic challenges, and political risk challenges that nobody had properly envisioned. So today, we see the remarkable achievements of PAYGO Solar, but we also see, um, you know, some important challenges that still haven't been overcome. Challenges like the endurance of the systems, right? In the race to have the cheapest systems possible that are affordable for the lowest of low income populations, the last mile. You find yourself necessarily skimping on quality, or at least longevity, right? So, you have systems that are under 18 to 24 month PAYGO contracts, which, will not last more than 3 or 4 years, right? So,
And the whole, what happens to, batteries, disposal, environmental issues, and even during the lifetime of the PAYGO contract, to the morality of, high cost of credit to the buyers.
yeah, I mean, this, PAYGO, as a financing vehicle, was, let's say, a decision of last resort, an end to a means, because of the failure of the capital markets to recognize that there's an opportunity to bank these populations. And so there was no other alternative. You had to become a provider of credit yourselves. And of course, that creates all kinds of other unforeseen risks. You're right. Easier said than done to be in the credit underwriting business at all, but to do it, for, populations that are spread out, that have no financial history, uh, is really daunting, right? So, um,
In the earlier stages also, a lot of these companies were vertically integrated, like battery. Over time, then people started socializing ZSP in providing the financing. But I guess at that time, there was a lot of risks being loaded into their balance.
yeah, well, I mean, first of all, the companies are all financed in hard currency from international investors. Their revenues are in local currency. So most of the markets that these companies are operating in are, high volatile FX environments. And even, some like Kenya, which had been stable for more than a decade, proved to be also quite volatile in the last few years. So you have companies that, are not traditional lenders and not set up to be lenders, having to take end user credit risk, and having to take FX risk, and also having to keep these receivables on their balance sheet for 18 to 24 months, which creates a burden on your ability to raise capital, because your books are encumbered, right? So, uh, if you can find solutions to finance these customers off balance sheet to the companies, you create a world of opportunity, because a company that uh, under PAYGO or lease to own or rent to own type formats was doing a $1 million portfolio of projects. That means they need $1 million almost in working capital. Now, if someone else is doing the financing, every time you do an installation or a series of installations over the course of a month or a quarter, you get paid out of the proceeds of the loan from whomever is providing that financing to that end user. And that immediately reduces your risk and the risk of a working capital provider to lend you money. So now to do that same $1 million portfolio, you need maybe $350,000 in working capital. And that working capital provider knows that you do $350,000 worth of installations and you're going to get paid out by a deep pocket off-taker, being the bank in this case, right? And the working capital provider also sees that there's no longer any exposure of the company that they're lending to FX risk and to end user credit risk. Those risks have been offloaded. Yeah.
And that, I think, since you started talking about the financing headache for off-grid appliances and business models, at some point, GreenMax decided, we might as well, be a fund manager. It's, created a lot of nice bespoke products. Maybe you could speak about, what each of these are trying to solve under these various rounds of capital stack and project timelines for some of these. Yeah.
Decision to transform GreenMax from its history as a advisory and consultant business, came about from the founders getting older, being impatient, saying, okay, we went to the global south for impact, and how much impact can we really have as advisors, combined with I guess, a healthy amount of hubris, saying, there are weak points in the way finance is being delivered in the off-grid space that we devoted ourselves to. So maybe we can come up with some solutions that are like a better bread boss. So, we saw a few, major challenges. Number one, the off-balance sheet financing challenge for off-grid companies. Second, the FX risk, the lack of local currency finance into the sector. Third, the siloing of different financing mechanisms.
Yeah.
We saw that there had been this recognition that subsidy is needed. We strongly believe that if you're going to electrify the poorest people on the planet, you need to deliver public subsidy somehow, because that's the way it's always been done. And just because we now have a digital economy doesn't mean that we can leap over the lessons from history completely. So in order to finance, in order to deliver these subsidies, results-based financing and outcomes-based grants programs have been developed by the World Bank and the African Development Bank and all the other donors through different platforms. And it wasn't long before you could see that, delivering grant subsidies, which provided a partial reduction of CapEx costs, in and of itself is not enough, because if you're subsidizing half of the CapEx, the other half still has to come from somewhere. So you need equity, you need debt, you need inventory finance, you need project preparation funding. So all of that funding is available, but from 10 different places, and the small nascent companies in the industry were having to shop around to go through 10 different non-aligned due diligence processes. So we saw these major challenges: off balance sheet finance for the companies, local currency finance, and the dispersed nature and non-coordinated nature of financing into the space, and decided to focus efforts on trying to address those specific challenges. It's kind of our ethos as a company. Let's find the pain points, and then, because we've been around so long, probably we've seen something somewhere in the world that addresses that particular challenge, and if we just tweak that solution a little bit for the African context, we can probably make a difference. So that led to the development of the Green for Access First Loss facility, which is a risk-sharing platform focused specifically on partnering with local currency lenders to expand their lending directly to end users.
Yeah. So shifting the burden of end user financing from the productive use appliance company or the PAYGO company to a bank or an MFI.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what, we discovered that not all, but there is a cadre of banks across Africa who, have recognized that the future lies in banking the underserved populations in their countries, and see off-grid solar as a means to dip their toes in that market. And but in order to get them to do that, we know at GreenMax, from working with local FIs across emerging markets for decades, that the banks are the most conservative animals in the finance ecosystem, and with good reason. They're the fiduciary for your and my deposits. Therefore, they're highly regulated. So to get them to be out of their comfort zone and do anything new, I don't even use the word innovate, just new and different from what they're already doing, you have to convince them that 100% of their risk at market entry is going to be covered by a third party.
Yeah.
And so we studied the history of risk-sharing instruments in Africa, and determined that the traditional pari passu approach, covering up to 50% of loss on a pari passu basis by a third-party guarantor, isn't enough to move the needle at market entry. You can get there in phases, but not at the start. And that a third-party guarantee, a non-funded guarantee, under which you make a guarantee call, does not move the needle enough for the chief risk officers of the bank. So we developed G4A as a funded guarantee. We place a cash reserve account with the lender, and according to a legally agreed set of protocols, they can draw down on that cash reserve account to cover losses in the portfolio. And initially, we provide a 20% cover on a first loss basis across the portfolio of loans that the lender makes to end users.
Yeah, yeah. So that's G4A.
That's G4A, which we've piloted now in Nigeria and Kenya, financing solar water pumps, solar fridges, solar grain mills, solar gensets in Nigeria in particular, and we hope to expand.
And e-mobility.
Any mobility. The next platform is called the Clean Energy Inclusion Fund for Africa, which was designed initially by KfW and launched by the German government a few years ago. GreenMax joined together in a consortium with two other companies, Persistent and Triple Jump, and we won the tender to manage the CEI Africa, and then we had to go through a kind of redesign phase. What we saw the potential at CEI Africa to do is address the problem I had stated earlier of the dispersed nature of finance space. So we set up the CEI Africa as a one-stop shop, offering a full suite of financing instruments to off-grid companies delivered under a single umbrella with an integrated due diligence process, thereby making it much easier for the companies to access all the capital they need. But more importantly, because we are not only a grant provider, but a lender under one roof, we intake projects and award them grants, applying a full commercial lens from the perspective of a lender. And thus our attrition rate in our grants portfolio is much lower than the RBF programs that came before. So
Yeah, yeah. So that's CEI.
And I should have mentioned in my list of problems a fourth one, which is working cap. So all the companies are starved with working capital. I mean, if you're a small business in, developed countries across the world, you need inventory finance, you need working capital. You go to the bank, you get it. Or if you're viewed as too risky, in the U.S. you have the Small Business Administration, which provides guarantees to lenders. You have similar facilities set up in countries around the world. In Africa, local banks will not provide that working capital to companies, and the equity is in infrastructure. Equity goes into projects, not into companies. So it's been very difficult for these companies to access that kind of capital. So we saw that in the emerging e-mobility companies across Africa, that they were really starved for working capital and were unable to import sufficient volume of the EVs to serve even the nascent, the small market demand that had started to develop. So we saw demand outstripping supply, And if you look at to last year, the three major asset finance companies that are financing boater riders to buy electric motorbikes in Kenya, just in Kenya, Watu, Mogo, and Ankova, they reported to us that they had pipelined to do 20,000 loans for electric bikes in 2024, and they wound up doing, just over 3,000. And the bottleneck is supply.
Yeah.
The companies in the space, even those that have raised 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million dollars, they've put that capital into their IP, into the development of the vehicle design, into the development of local assembly facilities, into their marketing capabilities.
There's a lot of sunk costs.
Yeah. So, when they now need to fill orders, it's tough for them, and they can't get terms from their OEM suppliers, which are all in China and India and Japan, and they can't get terms from the off-takers, the asset flows that buying the bikes and then reselling them. So they're stuck between a rock and hard place. They have to put 100% down payment, and then get paid, 6 months or 8 months or 9 months later with a very modest margin. It's no way to scale. So if they have $100,000 in free cash, which by the way, most of them don't even have, if they have that, then they can buy more or less 100 electric shoulder bikes without batteries. And then they sell those, it goes through their supply chain. 6 months, 8 months, 9 months later, they sell it to Mkopo, Mogo, or Watu, and they get paid. It's not a sustainable in the model. So it's okay. Ding, trade finance, and we shopped a little for trade finance for these companies and realized that traditional vehicles delivering trade finance were not available to these companies. They were too young, too unproven. So we said, okay, let's come up with a trade platform. And so we partnered with a Dubai-based e-mobility, a Dubai-based trade house called Tradable House Africa, and we partnered with them so that we can top off the working capital of an e-mobility company. They put in their 100, and with the capital we can access from Dubai, we can multiply that by 2 or 3 or 5 or even 7 or 8 times, depending on the metrics of the transaction and how risky we and our partners consider it to be. So now, with that 100,000 of their own capital, the e-mobility company can suddenly, bring maybe 5 times so many vehicles.
Interesting. So, 3 problems. How to attract banks and local FIs into end user financing. How to aggregate financing mechanisms into a one-stop shop model, and then how to solve the working capital challenge for productive use appliance companies. But even as you are doing that, the market being the market, it's quite dynamic. And we are aware that all these products that you've mentioned, how good they are, requires a lot of concessionality to make it work. So, but then the market has changed. International aid is sort of being squeezed out. Most EU and, the West generally is looking more inwards and less outwards towards, emerging markets. Maybe what's your reflection around that in terms of as a sector? Generally we can say, international aid hasn't been efficient, but we shouldn't throw the baby and the bathwater. But let's say
let's hear first what's been your reflection on recent developments. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the world has changed, and not necessarily for the better in the last few months. The rapidity of the change is stunning. Well, and the expanse of the change is monumental. Uh, initially, we had thought, okay, this is a Trump thing, but it's not. The Trumpian view of foreign assistance has been very much adopted by most of the European donors,
Yeah.
at least outside of Scandinavia.
As much as they don't like him, they like his idea on that.
And we see that now aid budgets are slashed 40, 50, 60% in most countries. And we see that of the funds that are still available, or even in, countries in Scandinavia where the aid budget is not being cut, it's remaining constant or even slightly increased. Where net aid is going has changed. So now it's all flowing to Ukraine, and it's flowing to serve the refugee populations inside the donor countries. So, what's available for Africa and the global South in general, and humanitarian aid has shrunk dramatically, and it'd get worse. We saw just in the last few days that Trump's going to release his next wave of plans, including, defunding the United Nations, or pulling the U.S. out of funding for the United Nations. So we've only seen the tip of the iceberg. So we all have to adjust our thinking, and part of that is rethinking our financing structures, but also rethinking our messaging, right? And so, I think that the development sector as a whole and energy access movement in particular is filled with wokeness. And I don't say that with any disdain for being woke. I think, we all need to be woke, but that's not what sells in the current environment. So, what is energy access all about? Energy access is about, giving the tools to the underserved populations of the global South to be able to improve their livelihoods. And if they improve their livelihoods, the likelihood of them leaving and going for greener pastures somewhere else is much smaller. So, we need to be telling that story.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, we need to be telling the story more forcefully about, what blended finance is and how it creates far better leverage for the concessional capital that's left by system.
So like the capital that's left can do more with less, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. There's plenty of private capital available for climate tech and climate smart infrastructure, but it is risk averse capital. And so the concessional capital that still exists should be used, in our opinion, mainly for de-risking private capital. And de-risking is a broad term. De-risking is, project preparation facilities, technical assistance to the companies in the space, technical assistance to commercial lenders,
and even funding for fund design as well.
Financial de-risking instruments like guarantees, first loss reserves, FX, de-risking mechanisms, etc.
So I guess the rallying call is for us as a sector to coalesce around messaging. I think, you know, we need to message our role in, for example, even preventing the migration crisis by giving opportunities in the global south populations. And then there's the aspect of messaging even to the concessional pool of capital that's still left around the need to, look at blended finance as a means of doing more with less.
Right.
Yeah.
And I added one additional message, which is, the economic opportunity that is Africa, right? So, I've seen statistics that say that by 2050, 50% of the working population
Will be in Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what does that tell you? That tells you that 50% of the primary consumers of the world will be African. So,
And even 50% of the entrepreneurs, right? If the market is here, the consumers are here, the labor is here, then even the entrepreneurs will be here.
right, but from looking at the current mentality of who is in power in more than half of the industrialized world right now, the mentality is, how does this allow our economies to prosper? And if it doesn't pass that litmus test, it's not worth pursuing, right? Well, if you want to build manufacturing, rebuild manufacturing capability in the U.S., right? Yeah, 50% of the primary consumers of the world are African. You want to sell your stuff to those people.
Yeah.
So you have to be thinking now for 2050. You have to be thinking, how do we, get income in the hands of these people, so that they can afford to buy our stuff? And again, I know that that's not a very woke thing, say, but that's the message we should be conveying.
Yeah, and especially if you look at that time horizon vis-a-vis, the 4-year election cycle in the US, it's easier to sell the migration crisis and all these other crises, and win a populist election rather than selling a long-term vision of what the world should be or will look like in the future. Yeah. Maybe just to say, to wind down, I think, maybe we should talk about, in the interim, we have conversations around Mission 300. We are now rational. We know that, we will not definitely achieve universal electrification by 2030. But at least there's something we can do. We have, GreenMax and others. We are building these investment vehicles to absorb some of these designs that are out there. Maybe you want to talk about that aspect, and how can, organizations, funders, and also partners, get on board and work with GreenMax and other like-minded organizations, as it were, within whatever we want to call it, Mission 300 or something else. But I think, on that.
So Mission 300 is a great thing on the one hand. I mean, it's very important that the World Bank and AFDB now have as a centerpiece of their policy, and they're in the very core of their raison d'etre is to electrify the people that had no modern energy services. And you could see how that has definitely galvanized the people in these organizations in a kind of call to action. And I think it's also important that about 30 governments have endorsed M300, and I think a dozen so far, and a growing number on top of that of countries have developed their energy compacts and made commitments with a blueprint for how they're going to achieve energy access goals of M300. On the other hand, uh, the banks are kind of stuck within their institutional constraints of the kinds of mechanisms they can deliver. And a, a, a big problem that we see is that a model has developed in Nigeria, which after some fits and starts at the beginning, has proven to be quite effective, through initially the Nigeria electrification program administered by the Rural Electrification Agency of Nigeria, funded by the two banks, and today the newly launched DARES program, which expands on the success of the NEP. But Nigeria is different place than most countries in Africa. You have a very high level of commitment to energy access because of, the crippling effect on the Nigerian economy of poor grid situation in the country. You have a whole ecosystem of very sophisticated financiers in Nigeria, which have allowed for the development of local currency debt and local currency equity investment solutions to accompany the banks, World Bank and AFDB's subsidy programs delivered through RBF mechanisms. So the ecosystem is now developed and is working in Nigeria. But how are you going to reproduce that in DRC, in Central African Republic, in Mauritania, and Mali, remains to be seen. And the model of the banks are to provide sovereign debt, long-term sovereign debt to governments, or to government-owned regional development banks, right? When you have a strong, willing partner like the Nigerian government, you can make that work. When you have a strong partner like the Malawian government, you can make that work. But can you make it work everywhere where you don't have a willing or sophisticated government and partner? So we think that it's important for the bank to think, the two banks to think outside of the box and find ways to support the alternative platforms like CEI Africa, like the Universal Energy Fund, like Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa, like NDEV Africa, that have been successfully delivering subsidy, and in some cases like CEI Africa, a whole suite of financing instruments into the space that define ways in countries where the bilateral World Bank, the government model, has a poor perspective for succeeding, find ways to support the alternatives.
So I get it. It's more of a, not an either or, but this and kind of approach. It's working in Nigeria, possibly in Malawi and other markets. But in where it's not working, you could find alternative providers who are more efficient, more nimble, and more creative in how they will deploy capital in those challenging regions.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course. that requires thinking out of the box, because it's not strictly allowed under the current frameworks that FX are working under. Yeah. And as one senior World Bank representative from the bank's energy access he told me recently, when I confronted that person with this conundrum, I said, think out of the box. The bank has to think out of the box. And this person answered, I've been thinking outside the box for the last decade on these topics. The problem is I'm stuck living inside the box. Walls of this box are very, very thick.
Yeah.
So my response to that was, okay, so why don't you use the collaboration with this whole community of, and the energy access ecosystem to kick down at least one of those steady walls. And, I'm encouraged now that maybe some dialogue about that can start happening.
Yeah, I think as the old adage says, necessity is the mother of invention. So I guess probably with all the challenges around liquidity in the market, concessional capital drying up, I think it's the right time to think out of the box or rip out the box for everyone's benefit, I guess.
Our G4A facility provides 70 times leverage for concessional capital, 70 times leverage. That says to me, we have some solutions that should be very, very marketable in the current context of reduce.
Actually, it says like even with a 70% reduction in grant funding, you could more or less achieve the intended results. Yeah. So with that note, I think we'll put a pause. Of course, the conversations will always continue. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you, Cliff. And of course, we'll put all descriptions of GreenMax and the products for investors, companies, and any partner out there to engage with us.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, it was. Thank you.